Australia's military history is more than a collection of dates and the locations of war-ravaged battlefields. It is the stories of service and sacrifice of those who answered the call of their country of birth or adoption and the enduring legacy they created. Join me as we look into one of those stories. Welcome to I Was Only Doing My Job, a Doc Network podcast. I recorded this episode on the 12th of September 2022 in Australia, and due to the international dateline, I pay my respects to those of my US listener base on this anniversary of 9/11. I also extend my condolences to the royal family and my fellows in the British Commonwealth on the passing of Her Royal Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Colin Kelvin Flockhart was born on the 1st of February 1924 in Ashfield, New South Wales, to John Eamshaw Flockhart and Lillian Gladys Flockhart of Earlwood. He was the youngest son to John and Lillian, who had two other children, Alan, born in 1922, and Alison, born in 1926. Considering how close in age the Flockhart children were, it shouldn't be a surprise that the family was very close. Flockhart attended the Fort Street Boys' School in Petersham and was by all accounts an excellent student. On finishing school, he went on to work for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia as a ledger keeper and completed an accountancy course to further his career. At the outbreak of the Second World War, both Flockhart brothers would enlist to serve overseas in October 1942. Alan joined the Australian Imperial Force on the 14th, while Colin, at the age of 18 and with the consent of his parents, enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force on the 10th. Both brothers previously served as part of the militia at the activation of Part 4 of the 1903 Defence Act that required all boys of warfighting age to have some military experience. Colin also had some flight experience in 1939. Colin Flockhart was assigned to No. 2 Recruit Centre to conduct his initial training, where he was classified A1B, fit for full flying duties. While training in Sydney, Flockhart joined the Marrickville District Cricket Club and played 7 matches in the 1942-43 season. There are sadly no records that remain of his performance. He'd be promoted to leading aircraftman on the 2nd of January 1943 prior to being posted to No. 10 Elementary Flying Training School at Temora in the Riverina region of New South Wales. He would be there for 2 months training and then onto No. 6 Service Flying Training School at Malala, South Australia for an additional 4 months. And in doing so, he gained his flying badge on the 23rd of July 1943. 4 days later, he'd be promoted to sergeant. Colin would travel to Sydney on the 9th of August and depart for England on the 11th to serve in Bomber Command. Transiting the Suez Canal, he would arrive in the United Kingdom on the 9th of October and pass through No. 11 Personnel Dispatch and Receiving Centre, Royal Australian Air Force in Brighton as part of the Empire Air Training Scheme. The centre facilitated both Royal Australian Air Force and Royal New Zealand Air Force crews and occupied both the Grand and Metropole hotels in the city, and served as a receiving station for all non-commissioned aircrew arriving in the United Kingdom. While there, the beachfront locales proved a momentary respite for the upcoming war, as well as a place for rest and recovery for those wounded in action. For those that arrived in the UK, however, it could be a long wait for up to 5 months before they were posted to a training or other unit. Unlike the other pilots whose life, service, and legacy have already been featured in this podcast, including the last episode about Squadron Leader Peter Turnbull, DFC, who joined the Royal Australian Air Force as a fighter pilot, Flockhart was selected to be a bomber pilot. And the Empire Air Training Scheme, also known as EATS, was a policy designed to train Royal Australian Air Force pilots, engineers, navigators, wireless air gunners, radio operators, and ground crews to join the Royal Air Force squadrons or the 8 Royal Australian Air Force squadrons already in Europe during the Second World War. The policy was envisioned after it was determined that Britain alone was unable to supply enough pilots or air crew for the Royal Air Force's defence against Axis aggression. In Australia, the scheme would also be expanded to provide training for pilots for deployment in the Pacific Campaign. Flockhart would have to wait 5 months before he would be assigned to No. 20 Pilot Advanced Flying Unit at RAF Station Kidlington, Oxford City, on the 8th of February 1944, though while he was waiting, he would be promoted to Flight Sergeant on the 29th of January. He would go on to No. 14 Operational Training Unit at RAF Station Cottesmore in Rutland on the 16th of May, where he was trained to fly Vickers Wellington medium bombers. On the 20th of June, Flockhart would be promoted to pilot officer before he and his aircrew would be assigned to 51 Base as part of No. 5 Group Royal Air Force in early August. While there, he would go through aircrew school and then on to number 1661 Heavy Conversion Unit at RAF Station Winthorpe in Nottinghamshire. 1661 HCU prepared him for the mechanical complexities of the newly developed four-engined heavy bombers, such as the Short Stirling, Avro Lancaster, and Handley Page Halifax. These heavy conversion units were formed in late 1941 to qualify crews already trained on medium bombers before they were assigned to an operational squadron. For Flockhart, his appointment to number 1661 Heavy Conversion Unit on the 18th of August 1944 would see him trained first on the four-engined Short Stirling, the largest bomber built by the British during the war, and then the aircraft that became synonymous with the Bomber Command Offensive, the Avro Lancaster. Owing to the obvious technical complexities and differences of piloting multi-engine bombers compared to single-seat fighters, it should be of no surprise that Flockhart had spent the better part of 2 years learning to fly since joining up in 1942, while the other pilots that I've covered, Bluey Truscott and Peter Turnbull, were already in the thick of the fighting within months of joining the Royal Australian Air Force. On the 20th of November 1944, newly promoted Flying Officer Flockhart and his 8-man crew would be assigned to the Operational Flying Unit number 619 Squadron, Royal Air Force, based at RAF Station Strubby in Lincolnshire, and flew the Avro Lancaster four-engine heavy bomber. The average age of this crew was 21, with Flockhart being one of the youngest aboard, but he was the one solely responsible for flying the craft, as British bombers didn't have a provision for a co-pilot. Owing to the unique circumstances, the 8-man became a very close-knit group. On the 1st of December 1944, Flockhart wrote what we would now call his death letter, a 3-page letter to his parents to be delivered in the event of his death. In it he wrote, "Some impressions so that, if by some chance I should not finish my tour, you will know just how I feel about things, and it may help ease the suffering and sorrow you will endure at my loss. First of all, let me say that I have enjoyed my Air Force service, and I have enjoyed no other years in my life, and I have been completely happy the whole time. I have travelled, made friendships, and shared experiences which will stand me in good stead all my life. This war was inevitable, and I could never have been content unless I did my share. I want you to know, therefore, that if I should die, I shall not be afraid because my heart is at ease. I love you all very dearly. Please do not think I'm pessimistic, but I do realize that the odds are, and I have seen too many of my friends pass on without leaving any words of hope or encouragement behind. Cheerio and keep smiling, though your hearts are breaking." Almost prophetically, almost a month after he wrote this letter, on the 7th of January 1945, number 619 Squadron, Royal Air Force, was detailed to take part in a bombing operation of Munich, in Germany. Flockhart and his crew were assigned to the Lancaster ND-957 PGM. After completing the operation, they were returning from the target in bad weather and reduced visibility, when, for unknown reasons, their aircraft disintegrated over Saint-Pierre in France. Though details are ambiguous, it is largely believed that a collision occurred between a number 49 Squadron Lancaster PB-586, who were also returning from Munich, as both aircraft crashed in close proximity, killing both air crews. Flying Officer Colin Kelvin Flockhart was 20 years old, and if the collision with PB-586 is the cause of the crash, he was one of 3 Australians killed. Flight Sergeant Eric Smith was Flockhart's wireless operator, while Warrant Officer Frederick Miller was the wireless operator of PB-586. The remaining crew of both aircraft are as follows, all from the Royal Air Force. Flying Officer Alex John Bolter, Flight Sergeants Anthony Frederick Murdoch and Robert Wilfred Knightley, and Sergeants Percival Stanley Graves, Thomas Luther Letchford, Ronald Watkin Price, Jack Court, Thomas Elwood Walker, John Thomas Sanderson, Alfred Frank Butcher, and Clarence Leslie Atkins. All 14 men were recovered by medical personnel from the U.S. Army Air Force stationed at nearby Beauvais airfield and were interred at the Villeneuve St. George's Old Communal Cemetery on the 25th of January 1945. Flockhart will be buried under the inscription chosen by his family, "Tranquil you lie, your memory hallowed in the hearts you loved." Flockhart was one of about 10,000 Australians who would go on to serve in Bomber Command, and one of more than 4,000 whose logbook would be eventually listed as failed to return. representing 20% of all Australians killed in all theatres of the war. His death had a profound effect on his family, and a memorial notice was placed in the newspaper on the 20th of January that year, and then every year on the anniversary of Flockhart's death for as long as they've been able to find archive records. His father John never recovered from the shock of the death of his youngest son and died suddenly at home in 1946. Alan, Colin's brother, would survive the war and return home in that same year. So profound was Flockhart's letter to his parents that it was actually enlarged to fill an entire wall panel and was placed on display alongside his dress uniform, officer's cap and medals in the now demounted Failed to Return display in the decommissioned Anzac Hall of the Australian War Memorial. There it would sit underneath the wing of G. George, a Lancaster bomber of 460 Squadron known to have completed 90 operational missions. The phrase, "Cheerio and keep smiling, though your hearts are breaking," also once adorned the walls to the memorial's exit before the memorial's recent development works. And it was at this display that was routinely frequented by the last surviving member of Flockhart's family. Alison would, before the pandemic and the development closed the gallery, would at least once a month spend her morning sitting in silent contemplation with her fallen brother, always resplendent in a magnificent hat and gloves, which is how she gained the moniker of the Queen of the Australian War Memorial. Where she once previously worked, it was one of the institution's first voluntary guides for several decades, and it was here that's where I made her acquaintance several times. Alison Aitken was 18 at the time of her brother's death, and would continue to visit, sadly, until her passing at the age of 96 last week. 2 days before the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who ironically was 1 month younger than Alison, and however was a great inspiration for her. Colin Kelvin Flockhart is commemorated on panel 122 of the Second World War Roll of Honour at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia Honour Rolls in Sydney, the Petersham Fort Street High School Second World War Honour Roll, and Panel 36 of the International Bomber Command Centre Memorial in Lincolnshire in the United Kingdom. At the very end of the path that leads to the Bomber Command Memorial Walls is a large stone dedicated to all Royal Australian Air Force personnel who served in Bomber Command during the Second World War, and on it is an excerpt from Flockhart's letter, which includes, "I have been very proud to wear my uniform. Keep smiling, although your hearts are breaking." Despite his young age, he understood what is meant by service and the inherent sacrifice that may mean, and he gave his life for our freedoms and in the hope of a better world. Thanks for listening to the I Was Only Doing My Job podcast, a Doc Network production. This episode was written, produced, and audio engineered by me, Ross Manuel, with additional research done by Laurie Favell. I'd really appreciate it, and it would help out the show if you took some time to share this with a friend, or leave a review on Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or iTunes, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, as it really helps other people find the show. If you want to know more about today's episode, with photos, show notes, and transcripts, head to www.thedocnetwork.net and follow the show on IWODMJ on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Don't worry, there's a link in the show notes. If you want to follow me for history-related hijinks and other nerdery, you can follow me on practically everything at Doc Winters. Once again, thanks for listening and catch you next time. Bye!